Today I'm going to be talking about the iPhone 13 Pro Max in 2023. Let's get into it. So I thought this video was very relevant considering the iPhone 15 has just come out, and honestly it hasn't looked much different since the iPhone 12 Pro Max, and I wanted to see, a lot of people might be considering getting the iPhone 15 this year because, if they're going from a 13, 2 years later, you might be going to a 15, and the things you might notice and whether or not you should upgrade if you're on a 13 Pro. Let's get into it. Now what it says, the iPhone 15 is very similar to the 14, which is similar to the 13, which makes it very difficult when you're making your decision because the iPhone 13 was one of the best phones that Apple made. In my opinion, I'd say it was a really good upgrade from the iPhone 12 Pro Max. 120Hz display, smaller notch, better camera upgrades, and honestly one of the best color selection that they've had. I loved that blue color. If you're looking into getting an iPhone 13 Pro Max and you're considering getting that instead of the 15 Pro Max, there have been a couple of good changes that I'd say do justify getting the 15 Pro Max, but it definitely depends on your use cases, and we'll go into that. On the iPhone 13 Pro Max, it has a notch and not a dynamic island, which I know doesn't sound like a big deal, but it actually is quite a big deal for a lot of people. A lot of people want to have that dynamic island so the phone looks more modern, and so that people think that they have a more modern phone. And honestly, the dynamic island can be useful in a lot of circumstances, and in my opinion, does look better because it makes the phone look more symmetrical. But it's all down to personal preference at the end of the day. So honestly, it's kind of your choice. It depends what you want, because you could argue that the 14 Pro Max is a better version of the 13 Pro Max. So just if you can find a good deal on a 13 Pro Max and you do not really care about which one you're getting, the 14 Pro Max or the 13 Pro Max will be absolutely fine for you. It just depends on either dynamic island or the notch. But the 13 Pro Max itself is very nice. It is in the square design that we've had since the iPhone 12 Pro Max, which, is absolutely fine, but can get very heavy. This phone is a lot heavier than the iPhone 15 Pro Max, which is honestly a very big deal. Now, personally for me, I have an iPhone 14 Pro Max, and my friend has the iPhone 13 Pro Max, and we do notice that these phones are very heavy, especially if you're without a case. These corners can really dig into the sides of your hand, which can get really uncomfortable after a while, especially if you're holding it for a long time. It's just difficult because these phones are really good and they are such a nice size, but it is just really let down by the weight of them. Now, obviously they fixed this on the iPhone 15 Pro Max with the curved corners, making it out of titanium, making it lighter. This definitely makes the phone a lot more comfortable to hold. But if you're not like me, and the majority of people aren't, and you have a case on your phone, then you probably won't notice the sharp corners, but you definitely will notice the weight, so do take that into account. So the iPhone 13 Pro Max has the A15 Bionic chip in it, and that is still a very powerful chip. You will find that in the regular iPhone 14 and the regular iPhone 13. Now, I definitely say that these phones, for what they are doing, and it depends on what you are doing, I guess, but for what you will be doing, messaging, calling, social media, you would definitely not notice that this chip is a couple years old. These chips are still snappy and they are future-proof like there is no tomorrow. iOS 17 runs absolutely fine on my friend's iPhone 13 Pro Max, and when I've got to use one, I've definitely noticed that everything still runs smooth because that 120Hz display keeps the phone up to date. It makes it look modern, which you do not get on something like a regular iPhone 13. Because the display is 60Hz, it makes it feel like the phone is running slower, and it's also just not running as smoothly. If you don't really know what I'm talking about with 120Hz, 60Hz, it's probably not going to matter to you and you're probably not going to notice. So if you are one of those people, just skip over what I'm about to say. But if you are one of those people that knows what that is, you are definitely going to notice the difference. I definitely say go for the iPhone 13 Pro Max or just the Pro, so you get that 120Hz, so that you future-proof yourself so the phone runs smoothly. It honestly does make a lot of difference and you do notice it. I say that this phone camera is very powerful, and I definitely say for a lot of people it's going to be absolutely fine. This phone got a lot of decent upgrades. Now, it didn't get the 48 megapixel camera that came on the 14 Pro, but it did get the nice 12 megapixel camera that is still very powerful and is used on the phones today on their ultra wides and telephoto. Do take into account that the cameras being 12 megapixels don't really make much of a difference unless you're pixel peeping. Now, what I mean by pixel peeping is if you're zooming into pictures and you are constantly, looking at the minor details of your pictures, you're definitely going to want a 48 megapixel camera on your phone, and maybe the 13 Pro Max isn't for you. But I definitely say I'm going to give you 5 categories that you need to consider if you're thinking about getting an iPhone 13 Pro Max and the cameras versus the 15 and the 14. So one definitely has to be the video. Now, I definitely say the video on these phones is all very equal. That 12 megapixel camera on the 13 Pro Max still holds up well against the 48 megapixel one because all of these phones are 4K 60, so they all shoot the same amount of video. But you will notice on the 15 and the 14, things are going to look a little bit brighter, a little bit more snappy, but that is mainly all software. Mainly the hardware is exactly the same and you're not going to notice it that much. Number two, I definitely have to say, it's photos. Now on the iPhone 13, you get a 12 megapixel camera. 14 Pro, you get the 48 megapixel camera, but it gets binned down to 12 megapixels. You have to enable the 48 megapixel photos manually, so do take that into account. And the iPhone 15 Pro gets a 48 megapixel camera with the pictures binned down to 24 megapixels. So what this means is if you are pixel peeping on a 15 Pro, you will notice that everything is a bit more clearer, you see a lot more detail, and this is all without changing any settings in the phone. And on the 14 and the 13, if you zoom into pictures that are taken without turning on that 48 megapixel camera, it's going to look exactly the same. So there's not much difference between the 13 and the 14, but if you are a person that does a lot of pixel peeping, definitely get the 15 Pro because you are going to notice that day and night. Number three, I definitely have to say, is the chipset. Now, this doesn't sound important for something like a camera, but it is very, very important. Now, when the photos are being taken, the phone has to process the picture and then make it look better. Now, it obviously is going to be quicker on the newer phones, but these chips are very close. Other than the A17 Pro, that chip is very, very powerful and can do things very quickly. The A16 Bionic and the A15 Bionic are very close in performance, and I definitely say you're not going to notice much between the 14 and the 13 because it is such a minor upgrade. You are only really going to notice it between the 13 and the 15. Now, number four, I definitely have to say, is nighttime photography. Now, the iPhone 14 and the 15 do this better, and the 15 does it even better than the 14. Now, this is mainly because the sensor is bigger on these two phones, so you are definitely going to notice that in nighttime there is definitely more room for the light to come into the sensor and get better nighttime pictures. So do take that into account. If you take a lot of nighttime photography, I'd recommend just going straight for the 15 Pro. That is one of the best cameras for nighttime photography. But the 14 Pro is also very good at it. Don't get me wrong, the nighttime modes on all of these phones are good, but if you want the best possible performance out of night mode, definitely go for the 15. And number five, I would definitely have to say, is the camera app. Now, you do get a couple different options in these camera apps. Now, in the 13 Pro, you get a 0.5 button, a 1x button, and a 3x button. Now, all of these are the different sensors. Now, the 0.5 is the wide, the 1 is the telephoto, and the 3 is the zoom. That's fine for most people. You're not going to notice that 2x button isn't there. Now, you'll be asking what I'm talking about with the 2x button. The iPhone 14 Pro, because it has this better camera, it has the 48 megapixel sensor, it can basically make another sensor out of the 48 megapixels and crop in even more, and it will still be a 12 megapixel photo. So, do take that into account. If you do want photos that are slightly zoomed in and that still take all of the pixels and still look good, definitely consider that. But the 15 Pro goes even more advanced for making the camera app have different focal lengths in the cameras, which Apple are claiming to be, it makes it more cameras, more lenses, but that is simply not true. It is not exactly a physical representation of a lens. You are just getting more options in the camera app to make the photo look the way you want it to. So if you know what you're doing with cameras, the camera app on the 15 Pro is definitely going to be way more advanced for you. For the average consumer, I definitely say that camera apps are absolutely fine. If you are considering getting an iPhone 13 Pro, I definitely say that it's a very, very good option. Now, it is in a sweet spot in terms of it has 120 Hz and it has that nice design, it has a good camera, and it has the smaller notch. And all of those things add up to make a really solid phone. Everything I've mentioned in the comparisons between the 14 and the 15, they really do come down at the end of the day to personal preference. All those things I've mentioned, I'm making sure that you know before you buy the 13 Pro. All of these different things that I've said don't necessarily matter to all of you. Like, if you care about having a dynamic island, go with the 14 Pro. All of these phones are so similar that it is really just down to you and what your budget is. But definitely shop smart, look for some good deals, look for refurbished, and just make sure to find a deal that's right for you and the phone that's right for you. But it's been Harry. I'm out. Peace.